This is Jeremy Wentworth Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Respectonomics is bringing you the Living Attentively episode or series. And before we get into it, I think it's important for us to have a rethink, a relook at what is the purpose of Respectonomics. My name is Jeremy Wentworth Stanley. I am your voice of Respectonomics. And what we want to do now is to revisit, what does Respectonomics mean? It is at its heart the philosophy and the practice, the purpose, if you will, of restoring dignity to the human being. Some people would say dignity, some people will say respect. In either case, it is trying to put those two together. But what's also important about this entire process, and the focus is this, and I'd like the Chief Executive Officer, the Chair of the Board, the directors, the managers, the supervisors, the staff, the suppliers, customers, the entire breadth, the scope of a business enterprise. I would like everybody to understand one thing, and that is what we are trying to do is to provide empowerment. In other words, to reinstill the individual power that's within each of us. Empowerment is a word that we typically think of empowering employees. And therein probably lies one, at least misguided concept. Because the empowerment we're talking about is across the board. It means that if we empower employees, we also empower leadership. The leader and the follower both need to be empowered. If you look at a railway track and you think of putting on a locomotive that has more power, you would want both of those railway tracks to be even, you'd want them to be balanced, you'd want them to be consistent one to the other. And that is what empowerment of the leader and empowerment of the follower, empowerment of the executive, and the empowerment of the employee. They need to go hand in hand. When we talk about empowerment, we do this on the basis that people today are generally overwhelmed and believe that they are what you might call unable to make a difference. But there is a difference that everybody can make, and that is to oneself. And that is where, again, this concept, this reality of empowerment is so important. There is one glitch in this entire arrangement, and I'm not sure that we have what you'd call a cogent answer to it. But there is, or has developed, what's called the annoyance economy. And the annoyance economy is the one that most of us experience, directly or indirectly, but we experience it when, for example, you decide to cancel a subscription or cancel a service, and how difficult it is made to be. You get an AI response, you get a human being that tells you to go to another department, you get all kinds of rabbit holes to go down that don't actually take you any closer to cancelling the service. And at that point, what you do, or is often done, is we say, oh, I'll just pay the money and forget about cancelling it. It is estimated, and I'm not sure where the number comes from, it is estimated that to the consumer, there's a cost here of $165 billion. The point I'm raising is that if there's an annoyance economy operating in business today, if there's that sense of you bought it, you keep it, it's yours, if we have that kind of feeling, it's very difficult to empower employees and to empower managers and leaders accordingly. There is an inherent conflict there. Morally speaking, everybody would say it's not a good idea to be developing this annoyance economy. But the annoyance economy is there. It's probably got a bit of monkey see, monkey do to it, meaning, in other words, if another company is doing it, another corporation is doing it, well, if they're doing it, we'll do it. So it becomes almost mutually accretive. And we start depending on one another culturally to make it seem like it's okay to do it. That aside, then, let's deal with the issue of empowerment. And empowerment comes from the idea that a leader will empower employees. Now, in order to empower somebody, there is several things we need to do. Probably the most important one is awareness. Awareness by both the person who is, let's say, being empowered and the person who's providing the empowerment. Because if we look across the scope of where we see empowerment taking place, we become very aware of how people are taken for granted, whether it's the employee looking at the leadership and just being complacent about them, and vice versa. So awareness is a very key to this. It is often said in psychological issues, when we have psychological problems, it is said that the first thing to do is to identify the problem. So identifying this lack of empowerment is, in a sense, it's insidious, it's hard to see, it's almost below the surface, and it deals with that sense of you just get on with the job, 9 to 5, and you go home. One of the problems that we see in many aspects of business today is that sense of fear. Fear is a nasty animal and it constrains us. It means that we're thinking about the things that can go wrong, that we work on a principle of anxiety and frustration. And of course, that adds to the sense of being overwhelmed. So, therefore, Respectonomics needs to give you the tools to be able not only to overcome the fear, but also to be able to eliminate it and to come out with some better solutions. In other words, what is the next step? So let's deal with this now at three different levels that we want to look at. First of all, we have mentioned awareness. But if we mention awareness, and if we look at the employee or the employer and think about them both needing to be empowered, there is this mutual responsibility. If I am going to be empowered by the manager, then it is also reciprocally my responsibility to empower the manager. The issue so often is, isn't it? You ask somebody, what's your work like? And they say, well, I like my work, but I don't like the managers. I don't like the way they operate. I don't like the policies. I don't like the direction they're going in. And that in itself is destructive, even if it has got issues to it that you know that could be done bigger and better. But the answer is, to the extent that I'm being empowered, my responsibility is to empower the leadership. And I do that by looking for the things that are doing right. Let's talk about doing things right. One of the most powerful ways to empower an individual is to tell them what they're doing right, not what they could be doing better, not that they're doing badly, but something that they are doing right. And that is in itself it's reassuring, but it's also empowering. So if we make a habit of saying to other individuals, what you are doing is right, the things you're doing that we like and that are right are whatever they may be, that in itself is empowering. And it doesn't matter whether you're going up the ladder or down the ladder. Either way, empowerment comes from passing back these ideas, not positive feedback. Positive feedback runs the risk of being sort of over the top friendly and everything's all right. No, it's a case here of being very specific and looking at what somebody is doing right. It can be your spouse, it can be in your family, it can be in your community. It's a thing to make a practice of what you're doing right. I might say at this particular juncture, what you are doing right as a listener is taking the time out to listen. You don't have to agree with everything, but you are to be commended for the fact that you are taking this time out to listen, to which I then can come back and say, thank you. And when I get feedback that says I am doing something right, that in itself is empowering. So the first thing we agree on is awareness. The second thing we then agree on is this concept of feeding other people with the information of what they are doing that is right. Then there's this issue of our own identity. Our identity becomes very cultural. It becomes what I'm thought I'm meant to look like. The leadership thinks it ought to look like something. The employee thinks that it ought to look like something. And we get this idea of culturally what in fact we should be looking like. And it's worth taking time out here to establish and to rethink one's identity. It can be as straightforward as I am Jeremy. Maybe you don't want to say that, but you might want to say I am Sally, I am Henry, I am Fred, I am Isabel. But whatever it is, even just starting with a reaffirmation of who you are is a very powerful starting gate to that sense of empowerment. And as we empower ourselves, one of the things that comes out of it, and this is really crucial, when I empower myself, so when I'm comfortable, shall we just say, in my own skin. So when I state that I am comfortable with myself, I am who I am, and so on, I start reflecting that very strength into other people, and they benefit from it, and they sense the empowerment as well. So it's a double-edged sword. You get it, they get it. When we empower, when we dignify other people, one of the things that's extraordinary about dignity, this idea of giving people their sense of value, when we say this is what you're doing right, when we talk about people's worth, when we talk about the way that they have taken their potential and they've turned it into an activity that has produced great rewards. When we do that kind of thing, when we dignify another human being, when we establish, when we draw out the worth of another individual, it is almost contrary to economic thinking, political thinking, social thinking. It's an extraordinary comment. What happens is when I dignify you, I end up dignifying me. In other words, it is self-perpetuating. Therefore, if I dignify another person, I dignify myself. So now we've talked about awareness, we've talked about passing back comments of what people are doing right, and we're talking about our identity, which we are strengthening by dignifying another human being. But here's another problem or challenge, if you will. Stand in the middle of a room on your own and say, I want to empower myself. It's very, very hard to do on your own. And one of the things that comes out of this is the ability, the willingness, action of being in a community. Now, the community can be, when you hear the word community, you quickly think about local village life or life on the street in your neighborhood. But neighborhood community is a word where we, in fact, allow ourselves to integrate with a group of other people for a common purpose. You can do that at work. You can have it in your regular work life. You can see the working environment as your community. I think there are risks with doing that because I think then you become focused only on your work. So I think community in the sense of looking at, let's say, a service organization, maybe a sports athletic association. Community is a very valuable way of when we get into community, we have a far better chance of drawing out our own strength and giving ourselves that empowerment. So in that case, community becomes very important. Community is an interesting word. You've heard me say it before, perhaps. Co, as in together, we cooperate, we coalesce, we do things together. That's the co part of it. The munity part is interesting. It's from the Latin munio, which means to fortify. So when we are in a community, we end up, in fact, fortifying, building up one another. I want to conclude with what Respectonomics is all about. Respectonomics has a focus of working with leaders and followers, leaders and employees, managers and staff right across the board. It doesn't draw any distinction. It's peripatetic, meaning it covers all waterfronts. The key here is what we want to do is to give people the tools to reestablish their worth, to be able to say to people, yes, I have dignity. And when we look at across the board today, and we look at the figures on mental sickness and illnesses, and we look at quiet cracking. Quiet cracking is when people just leave work because they cannot handle it any longer. When we look at all these combinations, we have this clarion call that says we need to put the focus back onto the human being. And the focus we use, the camera we use, the lens we use is dignity. Respectonomics is only a tool. It doesn't have all the answers, but it does provide a sense of awareness, a sense of conviction, a sense of passion, and it is also designed to give people the tools to be able to rethink how they can redignify themselves. In order to do this, we do the podcasts. I think there's 180 of them now, but whatever the number is, what we also need to do is to be in places of presentations, workshops, speeches, but where there's a sense of physical interactivity. And if you agree with this, then I'm going to put it to you to say, put the name of Respectonomics forward and be in touch with me. My name is, and I am your voice of Respectonomics. I have a team behind me of some 24, 25 people who are across the board engaged in different activities, but all come to the common cause of let's get the human being back on the track. The contact is Jeremy at respectonomics.com. Jeremy at respectonomics.com. And if you go to the Respectonomics website, you will see all the podcasts there, not only the ones for Living Attentively, but the ones for the Living Compass, the Living Asset, and Living Economics, and also for the Pelgis Pebbles. Pelgis Pebbles are the ones that work with young people. They're little stories, little vignettes, and they're designed to have a bit of a smile on our faces. They're funny stories. And with those, though, there is a message which is identified. It is articulated. There it is. I hope you enjoy this, and I would like to empower you with my thanks and my humbleness, actually, that you would take the time out to listen to me. Thank you very much. I rest my case.